yes, you will have God's promise, but it first will look like a seed. And what happens with the seed is first it goes down into a dark place where you see absolutely nothing. And then when you see it, you're almost disappointed. Well, is this the answer? What's that little thing going to do for me and my family? What's that little thing going to do for my situation? And what has to happen is you got to water it. You got to let the sun rise and set on it. You hear what I'm saying? You got to pull weeds and develop that thing until it becomes fruitful.
You were meant to think big, too big, but big. Your tomorrow can be bigger. Just grow, let the word overflow, yeah. Live a life bigger than yourself. You're created for greatness. Live a life bigger than yourself.
We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 1. And Ahab told Jezebel. Elijah had just called down fire from heaven. He totally humiliated and defeated the prophets of Baal and Asherah on Mount Carmel. And after Elijah did that, the king Ahab went home crying to his wife. I don't know if there's any other person in the Bible that gets under my skin the way this guy Ahab does. Because the only thing worse than a weak woman is a weak man. Now, Jezebel was a very bad woman, but at least she wasn't weak. So Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel, not King Ahab, it's the queen who made all the big decisions and fought for the family, but as the king sat home and whined and cried, sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so let the gods do to me and more also, if I don't make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. Now, what we see in this passage of Scripture is Jezebel was decisive, she was focused, she was enterprising, and she was strong. Really, Jezebel was a great leader. Her only problem was she was evil. Sometimes beauty and the devil are the same thing. Keep looking straight forward. Keep looking. Ladies, you have more power in your hips, lips, and fingertips than you ever imagined. And you got to use it for good. Yeah. The problem with Jezebel was, despite overwhelming evidence that she was wrong, she wouldn't admit her mistakes. Elijah just proved that Jehovah was the God of Israel, but she was stubborn. And she would not back up from her position. Mistakes can be forgiven if you have the courage to admit them. And when Elijah saw that, he arose and he ran for his life. And he went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. Spurgeon makes a comment here about this passage. He said, Elijah failed in the very point at which he was the strongest. And this is where most men and women fail. It was the wisest man of the Old Testament, Solomon, who proved himself to be the greatest fool when he married 700 women that worshiped different gods and eventually turned his heart from the Lord. Who you marry matters. Moses was called the meekest man who had ever lived on the earth, but he lost his temper, and because of it, he wasn't allowed to enter the promised land. Abraham, the great man of faith, we read about him in the New Testament. He failed in his faith, and the result was Ishmael. And we're still fighting over that in the Middle East today. And Elijah was probably the most courageous of all the prophets, but here we find him running from an angry woman. I get all the flaws, but I think I understand this one the best. When a woman is angry, even demons run for cover. I saw some hands in the room. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. Hell knows no fury like a woman scorned. She'll make even a strong man run out into a desert, sit under a tree, and start playing with his lips. And this is what happened to Elijah. And he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. He was saying, Lord, you kill me because this woman's going to kill me otherwise. Anybody ever been there? Keep your hands down. Don't do that. Don't do that. Proverbs 21:19 says, better to live in the desert than to share your space with an unhappy woman. Happy wife, happy life. Happy wife, happy life. Now, Lord, take my life, for I'm no better than my father. Now, I know we're having a little fun with the text. But before I get to our focus today, I need one more moment. How many of us thought that we'd be better than our fathers until we had our own family? We thought we'd be a better leader, a better friend until the shoe was on the other foot. But what I want you to notice is Elijah is a powerful prophet. God is doing things that no man before him had done in the same way that he was doing these types of things. But he was still a man. He was still a human. And he brought his complaints to the Lord. Now, when I first met the Lord, I just talked to God any old way. And that was a real, I know people listen to my prayer, they would say, don't say that, you shouldn't say that, and people would edit my prayers, but really what they were trying to do was edit me. Because it took me years to get out of the bad habit I learned in church. I started trying to put on a good face for God. And it became a little bit more about the mask than what was really going on. See, yeah, I no longer try. Now, I want to bring my best to you. But I no longer try to bring my best to my best self to the Lord. But I bring my worst self because that's the guy who needs all the help. Yeah. So I don't go in prayer trying to be somebody's bishop, somebody's pastor, somebody's daddy, somebody's brother. I am going to the Lord raw. God, I got some issues. And I know this prayer don't sound right, but Lord, this is where I need you. Skip to verse 11. Then God said, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. Verse 11, we skipped a little bit. And sometimes all we really need is a fresh encounter with God. You know, the key is to keep it simple and to keep it fresh. Keep it simple and keep it fresh. I meet so many deep people, just so weird. Keep it simple and keep it fresh. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. So if you were standing on the mountain and you start hearing rocks crumbling down from the mountain, and it was this great demonstration of might, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but Yahweh or Jehovah was not in the earthquake. The ground shook. And after the earthquake, there was fire. But Jehovah, Yahweh, was not in the fire. We often want something dramatic to pull us out of our funk. But the great things normally come from a series of very, very small things brought together. But after the fire, a still small voice a gentle whisper. The greatest insights, the greatest revelations I receive in my life very seldomly come at the high moments. They seem to always come by hearing God in the low moments. So it was when Elijah heard it, not the earthquake, the fire, the wind. Again, earth, wind, and fire in the Bible. He wrapped his face in a mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. He recognized the presence of the Lord. In an ordinary, simple voice spoken to his conscience. And this makes me think of when Jesus became flesh. Most people missed him because until the age of 30, he lived a very ordinary life. Some say he was a carpenter working with wood. Others said that he was a stone craftsman that was working, with stone and all the rest, building in the Sepphoris, which was a city next to it. But here's what I want to say to you. If you want to live in life, win in life, just do ordinary things better. Amen. And Jesus, despite the fact he seemed so ordinary, if I would have came to earth for heaven, I would have been about 8 foot tall, maybe 9. I would have looked like The Rock. I would have, when I walked, you'd hear the ground pound. It would be a whole thing. When I spoke, you'd hear me in Germany, you know what I'm saying, from the Middle East. But God is so humble, that he came in a whisper. So much so, there were many who didn't believe he was the Christ. Because they wanted the earthquake, they wanted the fire, they wanted the wind. But instead, they got a rabbi, little curly things going down the side of his face, saying sayings and riddles, doing miracles. But most of the time, when attention was brought to him, he'd hide and walk away. I love this verse, Isaiah 30 and 15. For thus saith the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel. So God is saying this. In returning and rest, you shall be what? Say, we need to return. And when we return, we find our rest. But watch this next clause. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. Don't assume loud is strong and quiet is weak, because you will end up surprised. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. Nothing is stronger than a child of God properly but quietly trusting in God's promises. If God said it, I don't fight over it. I just go about it because the fruit will eventually speak for itself. There's a quiet confidence, a regalness in the life of a believer that really knows his or her God. You don't have to scream it. You don't have to be loud. Just know. 1 Kings 19:15. Then the Lord said, go return, Elijah, on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. He was in an emotional mess at this point. An angel had to come down. You guys have read this before, and they fed him, and he sat under a tree for a couple of days. And sometimes all you need is a little bit of rest, a little good food, some good company, and that could turn the whole thing around. But what I want you to see is that his clarity did not come back until God gave him something new to do. Sometimes the healing, deliverance, the freedom comes as you pray. But a lot of times it's also as you go. Get back on your assignment and watch what God might do. And yes, you might need a little rest. You might need a little break. But when it's over, don't stay under the tree. Don't stay in the mountain. Get back to work. Get back on the field doing the thing God's assigned you to do in life. And when you arrive, God says, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. God gave him 3 things to do. One would lead his enemies, the Syrians, into captivity once he anoints this man. Also, verse 16, you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. So the second thing we see here is how his prayer changed things. Elijah was in his prayer closet. We didn't cover all this, verse by verse, but he was complaining about Ahab and Jezebel. So what God did, this is so important. Please don't miss this point. So what God did is raise up the man that would eventually remove him and her. Sometimes God answers our prayers by beginning a process that might take days, weeks, or even years to fully develop. There's a verse we're all familiar with. Remember when God said to Daniel, don't fear, Daniel, from the day you first prayed, you were heard. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me, 21 days? The moment Daniel prayed, God started a process. And that process was resisted for some days, but what I wanted you to understand, that the day God heard the prayer, the process began. And here's the challenge, and here's why we're so frustrated with God at times. We pray a prayer, and we want the answer to come full grown. But typically, it happens through a process. If you look at God's pattern, even in creation, on the first day, he created, the heavens and the earth. The second, he created this. The third day, he created that. The fourth day, he created something else. The fifth day. Then finally, on the sixth day, he created us. We were part of a process. Then on the seventh day, he rested. God showing us his ways. Yes, there would be an earth, but there was a process to get the earth. Yes, you will have God's promise. But it first will look like a seed. And what happens with a seed is first it goes down into a dark place where you see absolutely nothing. And then when you see it, you're almost disappointed. Well, is this the answer? What's that little thing going to do for me and my family? What's that little thing going to do for my situation? And what has to happen is you got to water it. You got to let the sun rise and set on it. You hear what I'm saying? You got to pull weeds and develop that thing until it becomes fruitful. The moment you prayed, if you prayed in faith, God heard you. Yes. But often we're frustrated because we didn't want process. We wanted a happy marriage, like that. We wanted our kids to just do right and be right and everything to go well just like that. But often there is a process involved in you getting to where you need to go. Back to this point. How many of us have walked away from God thinking he didn't care because God was more concerned about process than the destination? You see, I'm a little bit ahead of myself. But sometimes the road that God leads us on is designed more to develop us. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Menaloah, you shall anoint as prophet in your what place? So God also heard, he heard, all of his complaints, but he also heard Elijah say, well, I'm the only one left. I'm the only prophet. He heard the loneliness in Elisha's heart. So he sent him a companion. And here's the deal. God may not always send a husband or a wife. I hear some groans here. But in his timing, he will at least provide you with friends. All 3 directives were response to Elisha's prayer. Skip to verse 19. Are you still with me? So he departed from there and found Elisha. So he skipped the order. I guess his personal need was crying so loud that he went first at that. The son of Shaphat. Now the word found implies search. Searching takes time, meaning Elisha did not immediately drop down out of the sky after Elijah prayed. Finding his new friend was a process. Sometimes what the journey builds on the inside of you is as important as the destination. We want the thing. God knows what the process that he puts you through will build in you so you can handle the thing when it comes. There's a church in Israel that the door is about this high. It's a beautiful church, and people wonder, what's wrong with the architect? How do you build something this wonderful and have a door this high? But the issue is, in order for you to get into that church, in order for you to get through that door, you had to bend down. God doesn't hide things from us as much as for us. And sometimes the process that's put in place actually hides what's there for you until you're ready. Until you're willing to humble yourself and bow down, you can't get to the other side of door number one. And that is part of God's process. God designs the process to develop in us what we might need to handle the blessing on the other side. So he goes and he searches for this man who was plowing with the 12th yoke of oxen before him, and he was with the 12. Now, in the ancient world, this may be a little bit blind to us, but 12 oxen was like 12 tractors out on a field. So obviously, Elisha was very, very, very wealthy. In other words, land large enough for 12 tractors to work is significant. But watch this. Then Elijah passed him by. Elijah didn't even speak to him. He just threw his mantle on him. He just threw something at him. And he watched to see if he would catch it. Nowadays, people require extensive negotiations, extensive job descriptions before they do any work in ministry. We've become so much like the world. But to qualify Elijah, in order for Elisha to qualify, he had to be able to catch. With no preparation, no heads up, he had to catch and flow with Elijah. And a lot of us, we want all this stuff, and God said, just catch it. And if you have a heart, you will be able to catch it and run with it. Then Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle on him, which was symbolic of prophetic ministry. He was basically saying, join me as a prophet. I'm sure Elisha didn't understand all this until a little bit later. But what Elisha understands, he's like, listen, I want you to understand this, Elisha, right out of the gate. I love you too much to pamper you. A friend always says to me, he says, things don't go wrong, they start wrong. Things don't go wrong, they start wrong. At this stage in my life, I don't have as much time as I used to. I need people beside me who bring out the best in me, not the stress in me. It's okay to have standards because high standards protect you from low quality experiences. And he left the oxen, watch this, and ran after Elijah. How many of us are really running after the things that God has called us and assigned us to do, no matter how insignificant it may seem? Because when the Bible describes what Elijah was doing for Elijah, in 2 Kings 3:1, it says this: Elisha was one who poured water on the hands of Elijah, meaning all he was Elijah's personal aide. Elisha was not in the limelight. Based on the grumpiness of Elijah, he probably didn't often get thanks. But we still find Elisha running after Elijah. We're going to develop this a little bit more. And he left the oxen and ran. How many of us would leave our life of freedom, our life of wealth, our life of privilege, to become a servant of such a grumpy man, prone to depression, prone to sadness? At times he would get harsh and isolate himself. You say, well, yeah, that's a prophet. And yeah, he had such a call. No. Our callings are whatever God told you to do last. You see, you want a big calling, but your calling is whatever God called you to do what last. Because eventually you'll look back and realize what he called you to do last was simply preparation for next. Amen. And don't miss your preparation just because it doesn't seem illustrious at the moment. Because in the end, you'll look back and say, well, Lord, thank God for that tough moment. Thank God for that time I had to humble myself, had to bite my tongue. You know, what God does, he puts us on a road toward the blessing. But he lets some things drop into our pathway. There'll be some opposition so he can show us how to be strong. There'll be some difficulties that will require some perseverance. There'll be some unkind and unlovely people to teach us how to love, so that when we finally get to our destination, we have the tools and the skills to operate on that new level in that new place. And the road was simply preparation. But often we want that big thing and not the process. But the process is designed to make you into who you need to be by the end of the journey. And Elisha said, please let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. Some scholars say that Elijah got upset here with Elisha's delay, but I really don't see it that way. I think it was something else. Because the next verse said, and Elijah said to him, go back again. Watch this part. For what have I done to you? I think Elijah was testing him. And if you can't be tested, you can't be trusted. Elijah wanted the security of their relationship to rest on the security of Elisha's commitment to God's call in his life, not on the strength of Elijah's chemistry at any given moment. I have found if I'm called just because I like a person, what about when we don't like each other? What about when we're struggling? You see, sometimes love will keep the marriage, but other times the commitment to the marriage keeps the love. So Elijah turned back from him. No, yes, but it wasn't, you hurt my feelings. I'm out of here. You've given me every excuse not to do what I know the Lord's telling me to do. But he turned back from him, but watch what he did. He took a yoke of oxen and slaughtered them and boiled their flesh using the oxen's equipment. This was like taking a sledgehammer to 12 tractors and then burning them in the end. Despite the fact that Elijah gave him a whole lot of excuses not to fulfill God's calling on Elisha's life, we see here that Elisha was willing to burn some bridges to answer the call. Because you can't plow anymore if your ox are gone, if the yokes are broken. So he was willing to burn some bridges. And here's the deal, when you burn certain bridges, you have no choice but to move forward. I remember when I first gave my life to Jesus, there were some bridges I need to burn. And nowadays we have numbers in cell phones, but back then we had them in little black books. And I remember that I had to make a decision. I had to decide whether or not I was going to keep my little black book or start paying attention to the other black book in my life. So I had to trash a lot of those phone numbers, even the numbers with the stars next to the names. I had to burn some bridges, not because God was being mean, but he knew I might turn back. He understood me. So to protect me, he had to prompt me to make some decisions. What bridges is the Lord asking you to burn to guarantee your destiny? So using the oxen equipment, he lit that on fire, and he boiled the flesh of the ox, good meat, and gave it to the people, and they eat. God will often use your faithfulness to feed others before it feeds you. Then, despite all the excuses, I don't want to be with such a grumpy man. I don't want to, this guy, I don't know where he's coming from. He just walk up to me, throw stuff at me. I mean, don't even say hello. Then he arose and followed Elijah and became his servant. And you're like, Bishop, we're supposed to be in a discipleship series. What's all this about? Well, today we wouldn't say he became his servant. Today we would say he became his disciple. And because he was willing to deal with this grumpy prophet, this sometimes insensitive prophet, because of the call of God on his life, not because everything was always hunky-dory, not because everything was always working just the way he wanted, but because he honored the call. And I know I'm repeating myself. Sometimes love keeps the marriage, but sometimes marriage keeps the love. And your commitment will keep you in those bumpy seasons. And the passion and the fire will come back, but you got to grind sometimes in seasons if you're going to make it last. Then he arose and followed who? Elijah. He really wasn't following Elijah. He was following God for his life. And sometimes people are incidental. God's like, do you love me enough to get past that person? Because he's really measuring your love for him, not as much your love for that individual. Then he arose and followed Elijah and became his what? Servant. Or his disciple. Discipleship is simply the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were here. So today, I'm not asking you to take all the steps toward what God has for your life or what he wants you to do for your life. All I'm going to ask you to do is take the next step, the next one.